All right, well, hello. It's 1 o'clock Eastern Time. Welcome to the Alpha Anywhere demo and Q&A. My name is Dave McCormick, and I'm pleased to be rejoined by Dion McCormick, no relation, who was out last week, but is here to join you today to give you a demonstration of Alpha Anywhere and to answer your questions. Two things you should know before we get started. First, this session is being recorded. A copy will be made available at videos.alphasoftware.com, as well as at a different link, which I will provide to you at the end of the webcast. The other thing you should know is that this session is really questions-based. This is what makes the session interesting and keeps it moving. So if you do have questions, I see some people have already submitted some, but go ahead and submit your questions in the questions box. So that's right in the GoToWebinar interface. So anyway, let's get started. Let me take you off mute here, Dion. Hi, Dion, are you there?
Yes, I am. How are you guys doing there?
I'm doing great. Let me go ahead and make you the presenter so we can see your screen.
Excellent. There we go.
And so, okay, great. I see you there with your robot.
Yes.
Love it.
Okay, is sound coming through A-OK?
Yep, sound and video are great. Thanks.
All right. Well, again, thank you, everybody, for joining us. We appreciate it. Missed you all last week. I felt bored because I didn't have a lot of really good questions to work on last week. And I know you have a lot that are pending, so take the time right now to enter your questions into the questions area of your GoToWebinar control panel. Our friend Dave here will take the time to record that information, and items that we can't get to today will slot for future, and also make sure we're bringing you exactly what you need in terms of the information you want. I want to say thank you, everybody, for taking time out to join us. And here's a quick overview today. What I want to do is, before our little break last week, I'd gone through and talked about card tricks, ways to produce native-like experiences on a mobile platform using docking panels. So I'm going to go through that real quick, just like in a couple minutes. Go through it. If you haven't seen it, the webinars are recorded. They are online and available in our video library, our extensive video library. New videos being added almost daily on that. So take the time to check that out there, and that will bring you up to speed. Then also what I want to do is talk a little bit now, and as an extension to that discussion I did at the Alpha DevCon, is around how you can replicate existing systems using panels, panel cards, panel layouts, and pieces like that. And actually the process I go through to kind of analyze and structure sort of existing examples into Alpha. And this is a real short presentation, just kind of give you a feel for how to attack the problem, and I think you'll find it valuable from that standpoint there. So with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and do a quick review. So what we're talking about are panels. And what panels are is your primary tool in terms of laying out the structure and interactivity of your user interface for your individuals. And there's two key types of panels. One is called a panel layout. The other is called a panel navigator. And I want to touch on what those are real quick. A panel layout displays multiple panels, and each panel holds different content at one time. Although a very important criteria, which we talk about later, is that some panels in a panel layout can actually be hidden when you start, when you show the interface to the user. The panel navigator is a little different. It allows you to display one panel at a time to the user. And so for a mobile interface, this is the norm, where you have one interface like a list or a detail record, and you kind of bounce back and forth between them. So a panel layout, you have a structure where you can lay them out left to right or top to bottom. And I'll talk a little bit more. You can get pretty complicated. And so these are statically structured in terms of you lay them out. And this is kind of more desktop web pieces where people tend to focus on that. Now, a panel navigator, you have a panel navigator on your screen, and you have panel cards that are constantly being brought into view by either you programmatically or by the user through a swipe gesture or something along those lines. And the cool thing about that is that you can have tons of content, but then break it into smaller sub-pieces that are usable and shown to the user at one time. And again, any mobile device, this is the normal characteristics for how it goes. Now you can mix and match these. You can actually have a panel card or a panel layout with another panel layout built into it, with a panel navigator, and you can be swapping things. So you can create very complex, very rich user interactions with users. And what's great is all of this is controllable via programming. So you can have the user controlling parts of it, but you can literally dynamically relay out your page with a matter of a couple clicks by merely doing these kind of structures here. So it's very, very powerful. And the more you get comfortable with using panel layouts and panel navigators and nesting them, the more powerful you'll go. And one of the things I like to mention at this time is that Alpha has been working very, very heavily in our latest release to make this very lightweight. You know, one of the challenges is that if you have all this embedded components, all these embedded items, what will happen is over time, eventually it will kind of feel sluggish. When you load it into your web browser, there's a ton of stuff being loaded. But what Alpha is working on is some very innovative methodologies and techniques that will dynamically render these pieces. So when it's not really needed, it doesn't overload or put weight on the browser. So that's a key kind of under the covers. You're never going to see the actual code itself, but you'll see the impact in terms of your user interfaces running faster, loading faster, being more responsive, and overall less demand on your machines and your devices out in the field. Okay, so you can mix and match that. Now, one of the cool things you can do is use what's called a dock panel. And what a dock panel is that it's actually a panel layout. So it's not a panel navigator, it's actually a panel layout. But what you've done is hidden one of the panel cards. And by hiding it, docking it, it's not shown to the user when they're using it. But when you actually interact with it, let's say show that panel, it will then show up on the screen. In the case on the left is that it slides in and overlays panel card 2. So you can kind of see panel card number 1 is on panel card number 2. So this is a really good way to create those dynamic menus that you want to have pop up, allow the person to select something, and then move on from there. And you get that native kind of experience that comes along with it. The other methodology, too, which I find very powerful, is you can use the same technique. And what's happening on the right-hand side of the screen is that the panel card 1 is appearing, but it's kind of nudging or pushing the panel card 2 out of the way. And by doing that, it preserves your ability to see what is on panel card number 2. In the left-hand side, part of panel card number 2 is obscured, which may be bad because you maybe need to refer to some of that data. Whereas on the right-hand side, we're nudging it. And you're given complete control over that capability. So you can decide what is best for your user at that particular time. So I went through last time and I actually showed a demonstration, built this, actually showed how to set it up, how to modify it, how to trigger it, how to adjust it. So take the time, if you're interested in learning more about this, going back into the Alpha extensive video library and look up the last Q&As and you'll find in there an extensive demonstration on that. So what I want to do is kind of build on that. What I talked about was panels are your tool, your architecture for laying out your user experience, i.e. how the user is interacting with your product. So I want to go through some real-world examples, i.e. how do you say, hey, you know what, I really like this one website, and I really like how they structured it. How would I do that in Alpha? And I do that a lot. I'll see different ones, and what you'll find out is that there's sort of a common pattern that will start to manifest itself in terms of how you view these and you bring them in there. So here's a great example, Evernote. I'm not sure if everybody here is an Evernote user, but if you're not, free plug, it's free, go get it. I use it extensively for archiving articles, snippets of code, examples, demonstrations, etc. It's a really, really powerful tool that I find for creating that kind of external brain that I can access when I need it. And it's so fast and it's incredibly quick. Really love the tools. Anyway, I was looking at their interface the other day, and you'll notice what you have on here is a 3-level interface. On the left-hand side, you see there's kind of a main menu structure. In the middle is a list of a whole bunch of different notes, and then on the right, you have then the detail for a specific note. So what I do is, the first thing I do is start looking and dissecting what this thing is doing. So the first thing you need, and by the way, don't take my phone UDID and install anything on your machine there. I should have grayed that out. But you'll see that I've broken it into a header position up top and then 3 columns of content. So this tells me this is kind of a panel layout structure. So I go ahead and abstract that. And a great tool for doing that, and we've talked about before, are wireframes. So you have, in this case, you'll notice that I've broken it into sort of the root kind of columns of what it is. So on the top, you have a header kind of position, and then you have 3 different panels that are showing the left, the center, and the right. And you'll notice that they have dynamic sizes, meaning they're all not the same size from that standpoint. So basically, I kind of looked at the interface for Evernote. I dissected it down into the concept of, well, are these panels? Is it showing certain information in certain spots? And then I abstracted it out using wireframing to actually put it together from that standpoint there. And so when I did that, I went ahead and created it. This is what that existing user interface looks like inside Alpha. You'll notice I'm using a panel layout. And the reason I'm doing that is all of the content is being shown on the screen at one time. I don't have panels sliding in and out. At the top level, I have panel layout. I've included a panel header, and that's that top portion because it's always going to be at the top of my screen. And then you'll notice in there, there's panel cards 1, 2, and 3. So for my left panel card, my center panel card, and my right panel card. And you'll notice also that I've given them specific names, and this is very, very powerful. And I highly suggest when you're laying out your screens, you take the time to make sure to name your panel cards, because later on when you start manipulating them, it's much easier to kind of just, instead of just panel card 1, panel card 2, panel card 3, it's like, naming variables effectively. So you'll see we have folders that are on the left-hand side, and then next to them are note list, and then the actual note detail itself. And you'll notice I've structured the panel layout to be a left-to-right structure. That means that it's going to lay out the panels, first one on the left, and right next to it, and right next to it from that standpoint there. So that is the concept of how I took Evernote and turned it into a panel layout. Now what I would do next is what it looked like from the interface, if I go back a couple, well, the left looks like a list, the center looks like a list, and the right looks like a detail view. So when I start building them, I most likely will have a list in the PC folders of my folders. In the center, I will have in the note list a list of notes, and then in the right will be a detail. And what's great is Alpha has what are called parent-child relationships for lists. So my first list of folders, I could actually literally chain it together with my list of notes. And so when you click on a folder, it automatically refreshes that second list. So it's actually very straightforward to replicate the Evernote user interface using this technology. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at another one real quick. But I want to do a process check. Dave, am I coming through okay? Is it sounding okay?
Yep, everything is A-okay.
Good, good, excellent, excellent. Let's look at Gmail. So we have Gmail. Okay, so you have in Gmail, this is your standard Gmail screen. You have on the left, you have a top portion, you have on your left, you have mail, and in the center part, you have your list of messages. But notice that I've structured it where you have a top area up top, a left area, and a bottom. So kind of similar to Evernote. But let's look at this. Now notice when I clicked on a message, it's keeping the same screen, but what it's done is it's putting in it's basically taken that center portion and swapped out the list of messages and actually put it in as a detail of the record. And if I pop back, it would take me to my list. So this is an interesting behavior. It's just not a static layout. It's got a little more dynamic pieces. So with that, I went ahead and laid out my basic structure. You'll notice I have my header, I have my left-hand side, and then I've gone ahead and said, okay, I've got one big panel card right there in the middle. Now what I'm going to do is say, hey, you know what, that big panel card in the middle, it's not just a panel card showing information. It's actually doing dual duty. At one moment, it's showing a list of email messages. The next moment, it's actually showing me the detail of only one message. So we're swapping content in and out of that one panel. Well, to do that, we have a very cool technique, which is Panel Navigator. That blue area, I don't make it a panel card. I actually make it a Panel Navigator, which then has 2 sub-cards. One card holds the list. The other shows the actual detail record for a message. And therefore, I can swap them back and forth, whether I'm showing a list of messages, I click on a message, I swap into the Panel Navigator, the detail. Once I'm done, I swap it back out. So this is the idea of using the nested concept. So at the top level, we have a panel layout, as you'll see here. We've got our panel layout. We've got a panel header up at top. And then you'll notice I have a panel card on the left. So if I go back up here, on the left-hand side, I've got a panel card that's always going to be there. It never goes away. But then right next to it, you'll see instead of a panel card, I put in a panel navigator. And that's also sequenced left to right. And then within the panel navigator, I then also have two different panel cards, one which is called my message list, the other which is called my message detail. So again, very important is as you start building these out, make sure to take the time to name your panels, your panel navigators, etc. And so the idea is that the first panel card is always visible on the screen, and then I have my panel navigator that swaps out either the message list or the message detail. Very simple. As you can see, it's a very simple construct. Now, there will be a lot more detail as we go in and build out the specific components in here. But the neat thing about this is that I can render a very powerful user interface like Gmail in our system in a matter of minutes and get all of the flexibility that you see in Gmail using our technology in the same way. So it's really cool and very easy to manage, very easy to set up from that standpoint. So I'm going to do one other quick one, real quick, just to kind of reinforce here, is the Wall Street Journal. And this is more of like a web-facing desktop web interface. So you'll notice in here we have a fairly complicated look. If you notice, we've got headers up top, we got a slider in the middle that invest in a beautiful world, by the way. Every few moments it swaps in a different ad. Then you have some columns, you have a graph, and then you have some lists. So it's a lot of content, a lot of information right there. So what I did is I said, okay, first step is for me to break this into the sub-components. So you'll notice that at the top I've got a panel header, then I've got a panel card there, a panel card there, and then I've got three side by side and one kind of top to bottom. So as you can start seeing right away, we're going to have some kind of nested concept because it's not all just a bunch of panels going from top to bottom or left to right. We're going to have a mix and match situation from that standpoint. So I'm going to go ahead and go in. I've gone ahead and broken it down into my subcomponents. You'll notice that I have my header at top. I've got two panel cards, but then I've broken it into panel card, one on the left, the center, and then the right. And then the other thing I realized, and if you go to their site, you'll see that in the area where there was a graph right here, notice the buttons where it says USA, Europe, Asia. If you click on each one of those, it actually brings up a different graph. Now, you could do this within its own little component or stuff like that, but for the demonstration today, basically I said that each one of these graphs is its own panel card, and therefore I'm going to use that panel navigator to swap in those different graphs as different panel cards based on what the user does. And this is looking a little more complicated because of the nesting capability, but we've basically rendered this interface in alpha. So you'll see at the very top is a panel layout, since we have a static kind of structure. We've got a panel header on top. Then we have our PC banner. That's the next panel card. So you'll notice we have a header on top. Then we have a second card called PC banner. Now, interesting enough, that banner could be a panel navigator, because if I were swapping in different banners, I may do it in that manner from that standpoint. Then you'll notice that I created a panel, I'm sorry, there's the banner on top, and then the second one I did create a panel navigator. Because let me go back. Where it says invest in a beautiful world, it will swap out different cards depending on the situation. And so that's where I use the panel navigator slider. And then you'll notice then I embedded within the panel layout my panel layout columns. And the idea behind that is I've created 3 columns for the bottom part of the screen. I embedded another panel layout within my top level panel layout to kind of structure and show them left to right from that standpoint. And then I don't have it in there now, but you would then put in a panel navigator where those graphs are as a sub-element and then cards within them. The key thing I wanted to show was that you can take a very complex structured user interface and use panel cards and panel layouts and panel navigators to replicate that and give the user a great environment. Now, you know, the cool thing about that is think of this as a dashboard. So in this case, it's just, it's showing information for Wall Street Journal. It's an informational site. But there's nothing to be said that you could create an administrator's dashboard where the user at different times can sequence and show different information that are relevant to their business. So they could be doing different things and showing different statistics, KPIs, etc. So you can create these very complex, very creative dashboards in a very short period of time, and they look great. So that is a real quick introduction to how I go through. The basic concept, and I'll go back up to the top right here, is that you look at your interface, you break it into its component parts. You see if you have like content swapping in and out. You break that into a wireframe, and then within that, you take that wireframe and then translate it into a set of panel layouts, panel navigators, and panel cards. And the process is consistent. You'll find after you do a couple of these, it will become second nature to like look at a user interface and dissect it and put it together from that standpoint. So that is how to use panel cards, panel layouts, and panel navigators to implement any website or mobile site that you see out there. Highly recommend going out, finding one of your favorite websites, looking at it, and just go through that process and give it a try. And you'll see that it's much easier than you thought. The only other thing I want to really reinforce is that always, always, always name your panel layouts, your panel navigators, your panel cards in your content section so that as you start getting going, it's easy to find what you're looking for. Then secondly, more importantly, is when you start doing programmatic things, you're going to be saying, like for instance, tell panel card or panel navigator to show the first card. It's easier to write that code and to use the action JavaScript to trigger it when you have a nice named set of panels from there. And that is a quick overview of, that was the last part of my presentation at the Alpha Developers Conference. Yes. I hope you find that's valuable and interesting. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back to Mr. Dave McCormick.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Dion. That was terrific. The other two sessions can be found at videos.alphasoftware.com. What you want to do is you want to scroll down to the bottom of that page and click on the video library link and then do a search on webinar. And it's a little cumbersome, and we are in the middle of changing our video library to better find those videos. Also, last week, if anyone is interested, if you tried to log in last week, you had a bunch of people trying to log in, and GoToWebinar had a system-wide failure. It was fun to watch it on Twitter. People were getting very, very upset. So it had just, so we tried everything we could. So what we did instead was we took Chris Martin's session, which was a session he had also done at the conference, and that was how to build the conference app. And we actually recorded it and edited it and posted it for you. And you can find a link to that in the chat window. So, Dion, all right, I have got now a challenge for you. I had someone who wrote in with a question earlier today.
Excellent.
And this is sort of a...
Thanks for forwarding that to me before the session. I always appreciate that.
Oh, I would never forward that to you before the session. You know that would be cheating. That would giving you the answer to questions ahead of time, right? So anyway, so this is a very, very beginner session. I think you can do it, though. Basically, what this person would like to do is they would like to build a very simple, let's say, one-page application where they collect data on a form. So this would be mobile. They already have the SQL database in place, but they'd also like to have it be able to work offline. What is?
Okay.
Can you give us a demonstration of that?
Yes. I'll go ahead and show you how. I'm going to use the Northwinds database as our example here.
Yep.
And I would show how, like, we would edit the customer table. So let me go ahead and do it so that you can do it effectively in a offline manner. And by having your database already in place, that's a big jump.
The database is already in place. Mm-hmm. And right.
Yeah, cool.
And this person is very interested in data entries. This can be a data capture type of application.
Okay. Cool. Let me go ahead and go into our development environment. And so for folks that are new to the Alpha development environment, I am in the Alpha development environment. It runs on Windows here. As people often ask, you're like, well, wait, that looks like a Mac. Well, I'm running Parallels under my Mac, so I can run Windows next to it. Really powerful, very easy to use. So what I want to do right now is I'm going to go ahead and show you that, hey, I have an existing database, and it's a quote-unquote SQL database. In this case, it's Access, but it's any kind of SQL database that's available. And what I want to do is create a form or a way to edit information in a table in that database in an offline disconnected mode. And the cool thing about that is Alpha makes that really, really easy because of the built-in genies. So the first thing you need to know is that you first have to tell the development environment, where is that data source? Where does it live? So I go to Tools, Alpha DAO connection string. So before you do anything else, you need to tell the development environment where that database is and the kind of database. And you can have multiple. You're not limited to one. But I'm going to go ahead and click New, and I'm going to create a connection here. And the standard convention is CONN. That's kind of what we use in all our prototypes, demos, etc. There's many reasons, but just makes it easier. First one, always just name it that. You can name it anything you want. It's up to you. Then the next step is you click on the Build button next to the connection string, and you click Build. And that's going to bring up the SQL connection string window. And you'll notice that we have a whole series of different databases that are available pre-built in. And what's neat is coming soon, we're going to have what are called OData sources, which allows you to go against OData web APIs. And also we're going to be able to go against RESTful interfaces to web APIs too. So this is really advancing for the internet world really fast. But for now, with your situation, you would pick if it's MySQL or if it's SQL Server. You just pick whatever database you are in. And then once you have there, you'll be asked a series of questions to tell it, like in the case of Access, it's saying, well, where's the file name? And does it have a password? If it's MySQL, it's going to ask you where's it's hosted. Often for your development, it will be localhost. And then what's the username and password to log in? And then always click this test connection to make sure that you have a connection into that database environment. So once you've set up your connection string, you now have a connection string, and let me edit this here. And so I can test it and see, yeah, I can connect to that database. Alpha can talk to it. And that's always important to do that up front, because then you don't get into weirdness later on where you're building it and it's saying, well, I can't find the data source, yada, yada. Make sure that's solid. So that's step number one. And once you're done with that and you have your connection string, now I can start building my mobile interface. So in this case, it's going to be targeted for a phone, I'm assuming here. So I'm going to click New, and it's bringing up my selection of different things I can build. In this case, I want to build a web component that's used for both desktop, web, and mobile. I click Next. Then you'll notice I have a whole host of different things that I can do. And yours is going to be a little differently. Like I have some other secondary components, etc. But the thing we're looking for right now is a UX component. That's going to be your primary component for deploying your mobile user interface. So I select UX, and then I click Next. Now it brings up one of the better screens, which is the template screen. I could go ahead and click OK right now and create a blank UX component and lay it out from scratch, but I like to kind of make things go a little faster and also have something on the screen that I can then just adjust and modify accordingly. So you'll see we have a whole range of different built-in templates. But a good one I always like to start out with is a mobile app framework panel navigator with tab buttons. This one's just a good catch-all for especially a mobile interface, easy, ready to go out the face. There's some other ones that are in here. There is a sample disconnected app. By all means, open that and look at it, but it takes a bunch of more configuration to kind of get it running. So it can be a little complex to go in there. But again, that's a great example of a full disconnected app there. But again, I tend to start with something very simple, and then I can enhance it as I need to go from there. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Mobile App Framework, Panel Navigator with tab buttons, and now I'm going to click the OK button. So you'll notice it will immediately build a component for me. So you'll see it's already laid out the panel navigator, some panel cards, a panel footer, all that set up. So I'm going to go ahead and save that, and let's call that existing DB mobile dot, and I used underscore UX to tell me it's a UX. So there, so I've saved that. Now I can go into my live preview and do a working preview immediately, and you'll notice as it compiles the first time, there we go. I have a mobile app, and I can click on these buttons here, and you'll notice that the panel content changes. And it changes in different ways on purpose, just to kind of give you a feel for how it works. So we have basically the rudimentary elements of a mobile app. Kind of boring, but it does work, and it does those pieces there. So for this demonstration, what I want to do is create an offline data entry for one of my tables in my system. And what I want to do is, in this home button right here, I want a list of records, and for the second button right here is where the detail when I'm editing a record. That's how I've structured it for this demonstration. So I'm going to click Design. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to my panel card number 1. That is the panel card. When I click the Home button, is there. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that text in there. And I'm going to put in the core of any disconnected database-driven application, which is the list component. So I'm going to go ahead and say I want to put on my first panel card a list, because that list is going to be, it's going to do two things. It's going to give me a visual representation for selecting records, but also the list control completely handles all the offline mode data for you. That is how it kind of stores the data offline using the list control. Now, that's now what's going on very rapidly with the next generation of Alphas technology out a little later this year. It's actually in beta, is we're going to abstract that data from the list component. So we're going to actually have sort of, think of it as a data cache component that will exist that you can then reference controls to it. It's going to be very cool. It's going to make it much easier to do more complex apps. But for now, we use the list control when you're building an offline disconnected app. That's the core of the system. So I'm going to go ahead and click on list control. It's asking me for the name. By the way, when you open this up, it may look like this, where it's creating a single list, but you can click here and if you want to create multiple. So I'm going to go list of customers, okay? So, oops, didn't turn off my thing, so ignore that. So I'm going to go list of customers here. Okay, so now I have a list of customers, and it's an empty list. There's nothing in there, but it's going to be on my first panel card. So now we're ready to go ahead and configure that list of customers to tell it where it's going to get to its data, how it's going to lay it out, etc. So if you'll notice over in the right-hand side, we have the list of customers, and then we have, where's the configure? We just double-click on it to open up and configure that. So let me show you that again. Once I've added the list of customers, I double-click on it, and it opens up my Genie to configure that. Now, I could go through this here and manually put this together. I could tell it where I want to get the data from, SQL, static, JavaScript function, etc., how to lay out the fields and stuff like that. But I like to cheat. So I'm going to go ahead and go out of here and delete this one for now. Excuse me. I'm going to go back here and I'm going to click list. I want to put in a list control there. But here's what I want to do is I'm going to call this list of customers. But instead of going through it manually, you'll notice down below there's a button here called List Control Quick Setup Genie. So I click on that, and it opens up a different dialog. And this is a quick and dirty dialog to get everything set up. It's a Genie that will configure everything. So the first thing it's asking you is where are we going to get our data from? And that's where this connection string comes in. So I'm going to click on the 3 ellipses here. I'm going to select one of my connection strings, in this case CONN, which is the one I designed to use for this. So now I've told it, okay, where am I getting my data from? So it goes, great. The next thing it's asking me is how am I going to get my data? In this case, I'm going to read fields from a specific table. Well, the question becomes which table? And again, since you already have an existing SQL structure, I'm going to click on here. It gives me a list of both my tables and views. So I'm going to click on customers. This will vary by your database, how your database is structured. So I click OK. So now I'm saying, okay, I'm going to use the connection string. I'm going to grab the information from the customers table. Now it's asking me, well, what fields do you want to bring back? Now, remember, we're using this to kind of both display and edit it. So I'm going to go ahead and bring back all the fields. So I click on the 3 ellipses here, and I go through and I select the different fields I want to do. I'm going to skip the image ones for today and off to the races. Now, I can set filter criteria, which is really powerful if you want to limit it to, by their login, etc. You can set the order it's displayed in. You have a lot of flexibility on here, but I'm going to keep it simple and just say I'm going from this table and I'm bringing back this field list. Now you'll notice next down below it says detail view. So this is the list. This is what's going to display the list to the user. Now we have a detail view, which is where they're going to be able to edit it. So I'm going to click the plus button here, and you'll notice that currently it's disabled. That means that I could go ahead and create this list, and it would just be a cool read-only list you could show on the screen. But I'm going to go ahead and click Has Detail View. And you'll notice that it opens up and adds a whole bunch of different parameters that are available for me. The fields I'm going to use in there. In this case, it's saying, give me all the fields, etc. For your purposes, start out with just selecting the default, and then you can go in and change things as you see fit. But again, in this process, I can control how it basically builds my offline mode capability from there. Now, the other thing I want to do is if I wanted a search part, I could add that, but here is the magic. You'll notice it says disconnected operation. And currently, it is unchecked. So I'm going to check that. Boom, I'm done. Literally saved a couple weeks of work of setting up a local database and everything else. Bottom line is when you enable that, the system will automatically gather the data from the server, the database, store it locally, allow you to manipulate it locally, and then automatically synchronize that information back to the server, all by merely clicking this one little button, which is staggering. I mean, the time savings, we've had projects that we've gone on that people have gone down the road of using a third-party, just, HTML, CSS, JavaScript app, and they realize they need to do offline mode, and then they go back and say, yeah, 3 months from now we'll have offline mode run because of all the complexity that's involved in it. In this situation, all you have to do is click that one checkbox, boom, it's up and running. So we've got our list where we're getting our data from, we're including a detail view here, and we're telling it we want to be able to use it in offload mode. And I click OK, and in the next few moments, it automatically builds all the controls, it wires them up, puts them into organize, adds all the buttons, and I'm there. So as I said before, I want the list of customers to be in panel card number 1, but I'm going to take this container with all of my detail view here, and notice what I'm going to do. I'm going to move it down, and it's a lot of controls, so it takes a moment here, into panel card number 2. Okay. So we've got panel card number 1, which has the card, all those pieces there. And then we have panel card number 2, which then has the detail records that we're going to use. Now I want to do one other quick adjustment because I've done this before. When I go into list of customers now, we built this. If I go to list properties here, it's going to reopen that whole Genie I showed you before, our list builder. But you'll notice that everything has already been connected and put in there. It's got the data source set up, the fields, the list properties, the detail view, and then the list layout here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and modify this list layout to just get rid of a bunch of the fields because I know it won't look very pretty when I have that. So let's go ahead and put there. So when it shows the list, and I can actually preview the list right now and see what it looks like. If I had a whole bunch of other fields, see what it looks like here, it gets noisy. And on a small phone, you're not going to want to see this on the phone. That's going to be really ugly there. So I'm just going to go ahead and only bring in 3 fields or so from there. So again, this is what you've used. Once you've used that Genie to set it up, I can now go in here and control every aspect of how the user uses that technology or that list component in there. So now I've got, I'm going to click Save, and I'm going to go into working, let's go into Live Preview. Okay. So in a moment, it's going to render that. There we go. So you'll notice, again, not exactly where I want it yet, but it looks pretty decent. You'll notice that it rendered a column or list. You'll notice that as I use my mouse to pretend I'm swiping, it's using the swiping generator there. If I click on one of these items, like let's say Antonio, and let me scroll this down just a little bit here, and I go to here, you'll notice that Antonio is automatically populated in my detail view for me. So it's wired all that up. Let me go back to home. Let me pick on Berglund's, go back to the detail view. There, it's all there. And you'll notice if I scroll up there, I've got all of my different information in here, including my buttons. So let's watch what happens now. So I'm on my home one. Let's go to Anna Trujillo. I go here, and let's say I want to change their region to Texas region. Okay? So I've modified that, and I scroll it and click Save. You'll notice that it's now done a couple things. It's highlighted the Synchronize button, and it's changed a few things there. Now, when I go back here, check out what it's done. You'll see that for Anna, it's put a little caret right there, an orange caret. What that means is that this record has been changed, but it has not persisted this data back to the back-end system, meaning that this data is local to the situation. And so if I want to go ahead and do that, I click Synchronize, and in a moment you'll notice the Synchronize button now goes back to disabled, because you'll see there's no caret because I've just created that I've synchronized my local data to the back-end SQL database, and you'll notice I didn't write one piece of code. And that's the true power of this. Now, obviously, there's a bunch of things I want to change. First, when I click on here, I want it to automatically show me the detail. Secondly, I would probably lay out this screen so the buttons are maybe at the top, so I always have them available, so I have to do less there. But all of that is just sort of nuances that you can now do behind the scenes. You can start laying out your screen using the techniques I talked about before. You can move these buttons around. You can go back to the list and make this look a lot nicer. Instead of columnar, you can make it like, you know, a vertical-oriented list, all those kind of things. And then what's cool is now that you have the basis for editing this, you can now add other features. And I love to show you this because it shows how quick and easy. Let's say, for in this situation, when I'm looking at Anna, at this record, I want to be able to see where this person is on a map. Let's say it's a mapping component here. So I go back into my design. I go to my panel card number 3. I'm going to go into panel card number 3, and I'm going to go down here to map. I'm going to insert a map in there. I'm just going to call it map. So you'll notice now I've put a map control on panel card number 3. So then what I do is I go back to panel card number 2 where the customer ID is. I put in a button control. Oh, that's the other control right here. Put in a button, and I'll call it map it. Actually, you know what? Yeah, I'll go map it there. So now I've got on here, and it's not working yet, but what I want to do now is when the person clicks this map, I want it to update the map and go to panel card number 3. So I'm going to go ahead and show you real quickly how to do that. I'm going to go into the button map it. I'm going to scroll down to the click event. We talked about last week or last time the difference between JavaScript, these set of actions, these set of actions are optimized for mobile platforms. So when in doubt, always use this. If not, use those there. So I click there. I now have my action JavaScript. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do what's called a panel navigate. So I'm going to navigate to that panel. So I'm going to set the active panel to be panel card number 3. Notice I didn't name my panel cards. Bad Dian. That's why it's important. I would have put like panel card underscore map, and therefore when you're in this, it's easy to identify what panel card does what. So that's the first step, is I'm going to take and put the active panel in front of the user, panel card number 3. Okay? The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new map, or a new action item. I type in map up here, and I have this thing here called Google Map Method UX Component. I click OK. It's asking me, well, which map do I want to work on? Let's say it's map. And the action name in this case is, and I have a whole bunch of them here, let's add a marker to the map, the first thing there. Now when I selected that, you notice it gives me a whole bunch of different options. So I could explicitly put in an address and have a, let's say it's a map for your home office, you could explicitly put in the address there. But in this case, what I want to do is I want to get controls on the component, and then I'm going to read whatever the current control is for address, city, postal code, and country. So basically I'm saying, hey, when the person clicks on this, go ahead and look at what is the current selected, or what is the data in those fields, and use those fields to render the map. Now, obviously, I would rather have latitude and longitude, but hey, I got address, that's what I have, that's all I'm going to use there. And that's all I'm going to do. I'm going to click OK. So now it's going to first show the person the map, and while it does that, And since it's asynchronous, it will be updating the map to do the mapping. So let's go ahead and go in here. Let's go into live preview, preview that now. Okay, so let's go ahead and select Anna. And again, I would normally add a button there, and I click map it. Notice what it's done. Oops, they live Six Flags of Mexico. How cool. It's a good place there. And this is a full map component. I can move it around. I can add all the controls to expand it, show driving directions. I could actually show satellite. Doesn't matter. Let's go back to my home. Let's select Thomas, and let's map Thomas. And you'll notice, he's in downtown London, near the British Museum, which, if you haven't ever gone there, it is so cool. It's everything it's chalked up to be. It's an amazing, amazing place. So as you can see, I didn't have to write one piece of code, but now I have a full dynamic mapping system for a client built into my mobile app. And since this is all offline, I can be using this online or offline. So let's say I've just adjusted this person's their region. So let's say they're in the UK region. I can go down here, save it. It has now been locally saved, and then I can go in when I want to, synchronize, and now I have uploaded and added that information to the database, and all that can happen offline. You could publish this, you're good to go. So that's probably that would be the path I would take if you were just starting out, because it's simplistic, it kind of works really easy, you don't have to do any coding. Once you kind of have it, then you can start rearranging your screens, improving it. You'll run into some other issues like maybe secondary lists, like for instance, and I won't go into that now, we'll have that actually as a future session. But let's say I'm editing Thomas, and Thomas has, like, let's say region, instead of a text box, this was like a selector, a drop-down box, or a spin list that looked up a standard set of regions. That's where you get into a little more nuances, but the system can handle all that. You can actually have that region code in a different list on your system and refer to that list in this control, and it all handles that. In fact, there's a lot of new improvements in terms of what are called local data caches that will allow you to make it even easier to manage all that kind of semi-static data. You know, for instance, regions probably change once every 6 months, a year, so you don't have to download them every single time you start the app. You download them once, store them locally as cache data, and then over time you access them as you need. And then if there's ever a refresh, the system can detect that and do it once. Thus your app is faster. So all those kind of nuances, those new capabilities are in the beta mode right now, and they're going to be coming. But this is the best way I would start out doing your app, using those kind of templates. I think you'll be able to have something up and running in a matter of, a very short period of time. Get it in the hands of your people, ask them what they want to change, how they want to modify it, how they want to improve it, and then you'll be off to the races from there.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Dion.
You are welcome.
Let me see. I have got a bunch of other questions. Here's a question. This person knows about the app launcher, but their question is, can you have an A5W page and tell whether or not the client or the person using it is on a mobile device or not?
Interesting. I'm not sure if there's a command in to detect that. What I would probably do, yeah, I mean, I've only used the app launcher myself. Within a control, within a UX, you have what's called responsive layout settings. And in there you can do things like, determine what kind of device it is. But this tends to happen for that particular UX control. So depending on the complexity of your application, if it's going to really just be one master UX and then you could create different pieces there, that may be the way to handle it. But what I find is often people have too much content for one UX. They want to have different UXs, one for their desktop and one for there. So I'd have to do that under research to find out how you would do that to determine
there
what
may also be a system variable that would tell them like the kind of, whether they're on a mobile or I don't know what's what's produced there, but I do know that there's a way of reading.
Yeah, you know, because reality is this underneath the covers, this is just reading, excuse me.
What the browser is telling it. Yeah.
Yeah, there's this thing called device, and my guess is you could probably access that through a function call, but I just don't know off the top of my head. So let's take that as a research the answer and try and find out what we may be able to find out about that.
Okay, great. Here is another relatively quick question. Person has got a, let's say, a list of records, and they don't want to display all of the details of the record, but they would like to display up at the top of the screen what the total is for all of those. So in other words, they like to have maybe a list at the top and a total of things in that list.
Okay, so you're, and so this is a list control versus a grid control.
This would be a list. Yep.
Okay, so I'm going to point you in this direction, but in the list control, you know, we set it up before. We have a data source, we have the different fields, we have list properties, etc. But what you can do is, let me search here. And by the way, little trick, and most detail, since we have so many properties.
I'm sorry, I have to sort of qualify this. I think they just said it was in a UX control, so they didn't say specifically that it was a list. So they have a.
Okay.
So they really want to just
most
display.
likely you're probably displaying it in a list control.
Right.
So there's two ways to handle it. Either you could do a query against the database and set that control to be a certain amount of records. But if you're using a list control, what I wanted to show you is the list control has what's called a data header. And what that data header allows you to do, it's very powerful. Where'd it go? Where'd the data header? Oh, there it is right here. If you select there, you can go in here and put in data header. This heading appears before the first row of data in the list, and in here you can put summaries. So for instance, in your fields, you can take and compute summary values. So let's say we had city here. I can compute summary, and I can say count display and do all these things here. So what I can do is for each of the fields, I can create what are called summaries.
And if that were a numerical field, presumably totals and averages would be an option.
Exactly. And then what you want to do is in your list property, in your data header, you can reference those summary values to show a summary of what's contained in the list. And the cool thing about that is that when you update your list, reload it, refilter it, those summaries are all dynamically calculated, so it will give you whatever the summary is of that sort of filtered list of records. So what you want to do is look in the fields for the what's called summary values, and then in list properties there's a data header, and there's actually a really good series of videos that walk you through this. It's on the videos.alphasoftware.com. So just look up list, like list summary or list data header, and it will walk you through how to do that. It's really straightforward, and it takes a little bit of HTML, because when you get up here and do the data header, this is all HTML, so you're saying like bold, you know, total, cost, and then in here you would put then, you know, the fields that would go in, for instance, to you know, to display that summary value, and they walk you through how to do that in those videos on videos.alphasoftware.com.
Great. Okay, so two quick questions. One question had to do with the offline example that you just shown, and the question is would that work in just a browser, or do you need to have PhoneGap?
No, that's the cool thing, is that this actually is available in my browser. So if I click here, I'm clicking on my, actually with this I'm going to use a browser on this. I could use Remote Test and actually run it right on my phone, but I can do full preview. And obviously when it runs out in the wild, it won't have the iPhone surrounding thing. It's using that for purposes of this demonstration. Normally you wouldn't see this, you would just see the content in here. But this all works right within the web browser, so which is really powerful for testing and using, getting it out in front of people, because you can just point them to a URL and immediately they can start using it. And it includes all the capabilities to do things offline. The only difference is a PhoneGap, it's going to load faster because stuff is local. The other thing about PhoneGap is that if you have a ton of data, especially multimedia data, then it's going to be more efficient because it can use the local file system. The web browser is limited by the amount of data that you can kind of cache on that browser. So, it depends. This is great when you start out, just use the web browser. You can use a URL to go to it, and then once you're kind of going, then you can wrap it into PhoneGap and be off to the races from there.
Excellent. And a question about the first thing that you showed, and this is about the Wall Street Journal example. The person says,
yes.
The Wall Street Journal is a responsive site, so when the screen is smaller, different panels reflow to different positions to show more condensed information. Can this be done in alpha?
Yeah, there's two ways to handle that. First, by their nature, panel cards and things are responsive. So they will extend themselves vertically and horizontally to consume the space. And in fact, we can see that in live preview here on this mobile example. If I go to, like, say, a iPad 4, you'll notice that it dynamically extended the content to grab more of the screen and use more of it more efficiently. Now, that's just off the shelf. Now, let's say, I think the question also, or where it came from, is that, this kind of keeps the same layout. It just takes more advantage of the screen depending on how much is available, depending on the platform you're on. But let's say you actually wanted to reorganize how those layouts of panels are. What you can do, which is really powerful, which I kind of alluded to, is I can go to Properties, go to Responsive Layout Settings. And in here, what I can do is add a rule that says, if I am on a Windows platform, or I am on, let's say if it is a, if it's a tablet, I can determine what. So let me just grab tablet on there. I can then click OK. Screen just takes a little space here. Okay, we'll call it tablet rule. Click OK. Now what I can do is I can say modify properties, okay, or set the active layout in a list control, or set the position and size for controls. So what this allows you to do is you can detect the kind of device you're on and do that from there. But it's not only device that you can detect. Let me go ahead and delete that rule, add this rule. I can actually go in there and say, what is my screen width and height, or my orientation? So I can trap those kind of sort of like, I'm in a different, I've got so much space, and you can really dynamically lay out your layouts in a different way. You can actually point it to where you maybe have something that has more panel cards shown at one time versus fewer. So all of that is available within here, because what it can do is dynamically read its environment and then trigger these rules to say, okay, based on that rule, what should I do to lay out the screen? And the cool thing about that is then you don't have to go out and create 5 or 6 different versions for different platforms. You can consolidate into 1 or 2. Oops, did I lose you?
Yeah, sorry about that. It helps when my mic is turned up.
I thought it was mine. I thought
no, it wasn't you. So anyway, a quick question about someone who's using DBF tables. They said they don't want to convert to SQL, but they wanted to know, is it possible to do offline data persistence with that, or does that only work with SQL tables?
The answer is yes, but with a big asterisk.
Okay.
The big asterisk is this, that if it's SQL, the system will take care of all the synchronization of data for you because it already has those algorithms built into it. Mm-hmm. If you're DBF, you'll be in a position where you're going to have to write that synchronization code yourself. It's not that it can't be done. It's just it's a matter of work that you'll have to do to. And what it is in the list control, and let me see if I can find this real quick. Let me go here. controls. Let me go ahead and just, I'm going to add a new list control. Okay. DBF. Okay. Sorry, okay. So I've got my list control here. I can select DBF, so I can use DBF as from that standpoint here. But now what I'll have to do is in the list properties sync, there is a space where I have to put in my own code to do the synchronization in the list events. So in the list events I have on sync, where is it? I haven't done it myself, I just use DBF, or I'm sorry, just use SQL. But you'll have to, once you've selected the DBF, then any of your synchronization, you're going to have to write the code to do that actual compare against the records and update and write and give the user errors and things like that. So it's doable, and if you're doing read-only, that will work fine. But the tricky part comes into where if you have to synchronize the data back, those changes, you're going to have to handle the code to do that. That's the only caveat for using DBF.
Right, gotcha. Well, thank you very much, Dion. That is the end of the time that we have right now. I'd like to thank everyone who participated and asked questions. Please feel free to also send your questions into guides, G-U-I-D-E-S, at alphasoftware.com. Dion and I will take a look at them. A copy of this recording will be made available in a couple of days. Let me point you to where that is, if I could just take control here for a second.
By all means.
Dion, we have just moved servers. We're now hosted over at ZebraHost. It's one of our preferred hosting providers. We hadn't actually used them for our website before, but we're really enjoying them. So I'm going to go ahead and make myself the presenter. I'm going to show my screen. Okay. Just pop over here. Is my screen coming through, Dion?
Let me see here. And yes, the answer is yes.
Great. Okay. So if you go to videos.alphasoftware.com, and you scroll down to go to the documentation library. This is an Alpha Anywhere application you may recognize. You type in webinar. Here you will find a whole bunch of our videos, including the session, for example, that we didn't get done last week is right here. You can also organize them by date. That's another great way to do it. In fact, if you just clear it and just say date, you could find them this way, or you could do it in a combination and type webinar. But that's where you find them. You will soon find them here at here. I'll show you the other place. This is going to become the official link. That's alphasoftware.com/video-library. It's good, but it's not. But we're having an issue right now, so it's probably going to be a week or two before this is fully up to date with all of the webinars. So for now, just use the method I showed you at videos.alphasoftware.com. So I hope that wasn't too confusing. Anyway, thank you again, and we hope to see you at a future webinar. Take care, and goodbye.